Tonight, we are traveling back tens of millions of years to a continent cut loose from the world, drifting quietly into danger. Australia was not shaped by balance in the way other lands were. It broke from Gondwana and remained isolated longer than any other inhabited continent, with no land bridges, no waves of new predators, and no evolutionary resets. Evidence suggests that as the rest of the world exchanged species and competition, tempered extremity, this land evolved alone. Survival here favored traits that ended encounters quickly: power, venom, ambush, and a resilience tuned to drought, fire, and long scarcity. In that isolation, the usual checks never arrived. Without large placental carnivores to compete, native predators expanded into every available role. Some grew immense, others specialized in sudden force rather than pursuit. Danger did not spread evenly across the ecosystem, it concentrated. Lineages that vanished elsewhere endured here, surviving extinction events that erased similar threats on other continents. By the time humans arrived, perhaps 50,000 years ago, they stepped into an ecosystem that had been refining itself in isolation for longer than almost anywhere else on Earth. Early survival was uncertain, not because the land was chaotic, but because it was already complete. But how does a place evolve to be this hostile? What allowed so many extreme predators to survive when others vanished elsewhere? How did danger here take such different forms from the rest of the world? And how did humans survive at all? Tonight, we'll drift back to that sealed off world. We'll meet the creatures that evolved without witnesses, and we'll ask what happens when a continent has millions of years to figure things out on its own. But before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Your comments are one of my favorite parts of this sleepy little community. If this space brings you peace, a like or a subscribe helps others find their way here too. And if you're already subscribed, thank you. You're part of what makes this corner of the internet feel so calm. So now take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and together, let us step softly into the land that evolution made unforgiving. When Australia finally loosened its grip on Gondwana, the change was not dramatic in the way disasters are. There was no single moment the land could feel itself leave. Instead, separation unfolded slowly, almost politely, as ancient crust stretched, thinned, and yielded to widening seas. Warm water filled the growing distance, turning shared forests into memories and cutting familiar migration paths strand by strand. What followed was not an explosion of novelty, but an absence. The bridges that elsewhere allowed animals to wander, challenge one another, and dilute extremes never formed here. No great waves of newcomers arrived to unsettle what was already in place. While other continents were repeatedly reshaped by arrivals and departures, by collisions and reconnections, this land drifted outward, quietly slipping beyond reach. Over deep time, that distance became more than geography. It became silence in the evolutionary conversation. Genes that would have been pushed aside elsewhere remained. Experiments that might have failed under pressure were given space to refine themselves. Life here learned without interruption, repeating the same lessons across countless generations, adjusting not to rivals from afar, but to the land itself, to heat, dryness, fire, and the long wait between rewards. Isolation did not speed evolution up, it slowed it down in a way that allowed extremes to deepen, to settle, to become stable rather than fleeting. As the continent drifted, its living systems turned inward. Without land bridges, there were no sudden corrections, no resets when competitors arrived with sharper tools or more efficient strategies. Traits were tested only by what already existed and by the environment that surrounded them. In such a closed world, survival favored certainty. Energy could not be wasted on long chases across open ground that might never yield food. Strength that ended encounters quickly became more valuable than endurance. Venom that resolved conflict without struggle conserved precious resources. Patience became as important as power, waiting motionless through heat and scarcity until the moment arrived. Over time, these traits did not merely persist, they accumulated. Each generation added small refinements, tightening systems rather than replacing them. Elsewhere on Earth, balance often arrived through competition, one lineage checking another before either could grow too dominant. Here, balance came through specialization, each role filled more completely, each strategy sharpened rather than blunted. The land itself encouraged this pattern. Fire returned again and again, not as a rare catastrophe, but as a rhythm. Drought stretched seasons thin, teaching life to endure absence more than abundance. In such conditions, moderation offered little advantage. Extremity, once successful, had no reason to retreat. Over millions of years, this uninterrupted refinement reshaped the living fabric of the continent. Predators did not simply exist, they fit precisely into their niches, calibrated to the land's limits and rewards. Even herbivores learned to persist at scale, shaping vegetation and soil in ways that fed back into the system, reinforcing the same pressures that had created them. Isolation became the quiet architect behind it all, not dramatic, not visible in any single fossil, but present in every outline and behavior. It allowed danger to become efficient rather than chaotic, ancient rather than fleeting. And by the time the wider world would eventually notice this place again, the work was already done. The continent had spent millions of years becoming exactly what it was, uninterrupted, uncorrected, and complete. As isolation settled into permanence, the land began to answer a problem that never quite resolved itself. Every ecosystem needs pressure at its highest points, forces that shape behavior, numbers, and movement. On most continents, that pressure arrived through waves of newcomers. Big cats refined stealth against one another, wolves competed in packs, bears claimed strength through sheer mass. Each arrival adjusted the balance, trimming back what had grown too dominant and preventing any single line from expanding too far. Here, that pattern never arrived. The roles at the top remained open, not because life failed to fill them, but because there were no familiar rivals to claim them first. Slowly, patiently, native lineages began stepping upward into those empty spaces. Not all at once, not in a rush, but through long sequences of small advantages compounded over time. Bodies changed shape, muscles thickened, jaws strengthened, senses narrowed and sharpened toward sudden action. Without foreign competitors to test them, these predators refined themselves against prey that could not leave and landscapes that did not soften. Apex roles did not rotate here. They settled, deepened, and became more absolute. What makes this process unusual is not that predators evolved, but how they did so in the absence of the usual checks. There were no big cats arriving with flexible hunting strategies honed across continents, no wolves forming packs that forced speed and endurance races, no bears whose sheer bulk discouraged excess growth in others. Instead, predators emerged from the same ancient pool of native life, shaped by the same environmental limits, feeding back into one another. Because of this, danger did not distribute itself evenly, it clustered. Each successful hunting strategy reduced the space for alternatives, encouraging specialization rather than balance. One lineage might favor ambush and dense cover, another overwhelming force in close quarters, another patience stretched across heat and hunger. Rather than canceling each other out, these strategies stacked, filling adjacent niches with variations of the same core idea. Over millions of years, this produced ecosystems where the top end felt crowded with intensity, even if overall diversity remained relatively contained. The absence of rivals did not make the system gentler, it made it more focused. As these predators grew more capable, prey adapted in response, but within strict limits. On continents connected by land bridges, prey often responded to danger by migrating, spreading out, or adopting strategies borrowed from newcomers. Here, movement had boundaries. Adaptation turned inward, favoring awareness, caution, and reproduction strategies that could withstand loss. This created a feedback loop where predators faced prey that was increasingly careful, but still present, still predictable, still part of the same closed system. Over time, this reinforced hunting methods that relied on certainty rather than prolonged pursuit. Energy conservation mattered more than spectacle. A successful encounter needed to end quickly, before heat or injury tipped the balance. In this way, apex predators became less about dominance displays and more about efficiency. Their presence shaped behavior quietly, through absence and anticipation rather than constant confrontation. Because these apex roles were filled by native species rather than imported ones, they carried the imprint of the land itself. Their rhythms matched drought cycles. Their movements followed fire-scarred ground and regrowth patterns. They were not visitors imposing order from outside, but products of the same long refinement that shaped the soil and plants beneath them. This intimacy with the landscape made them resilient to changes that erased similar predators elsewhere. When climates shifted or extinction pressures arrived, these animals were already tuned to scarcity and instability. Their survival strategies did not depend on abundance, only on persistence. This is why danger here did not fade when conditions grew harsher. It tightened. Apex predators remained not because they dominated through brute force alone, but because they fit. They belonged in ways that could not be easily replaced or disrupted. Over deep time, the absence of external rivals created something that appears paradoxical. One might expect unchecked predators to destabilize their ecosystems, but instead, the system settled into a tense equilibrium. Numbers remained low, encounters rare, consequences severe. Danger became something woven into silence and stillness rather than constant motion. It waited. This concentration of threat, shaped without interruption, explains why the continent came to feel heavy with risk even when life was sparse. Apex killers were not numerous, but they were finely honed, occupying roles so precisely that nothing else could slide into their place. By the time the broader world would eventually collide with this system, it was not chaotic or unfinished. It was mature, inwardly balanced, and deeply unforgiving to anything that arrived without preparation. In the long, quiet after apex roles settled into place, one predator came to embody the logic of this land more clearly than any other. It was not shaped for distance or pursuit, and it carried none of the restlessness seen in hunters built for open plains. Its body spoke of compression rather than speed, of strength folded inward, ready to be released all at once. The shoulders were heavy, the forelimbs powerful, the chest broad and stable. Every proportion suggested a life lived close to the ground, among tangled vegetation and uneven terrain where chasing would waste energy and precision mattered more than momentum. The hind limbs did not stretch into long levers for running. Instead, they anchored sudden bursts forward. The spine did not flex for endurance. It braced for impact. This animal did not need to follow prey across landscapes. It only needed to wait. When it moved, it did so briefly, decisively, and at close range. In this, its design echoed the deeper pattern of Australia itself. Power here was not about covering distance, but about ending encounters before they could become costly. The jaws reflected this truth with particular clarity. Compared to animals of similar size elsewhere, the bite was extraordinary, not because it snapped quickly, but because it closed with crushing certainty. The muscles that drove it were arranged for force rather than repetition, turning bone and tendon into a single purpose tool. Once contact was made, escape became unlikely. This was not a hunter interested in wearing prey down. It was built to conclude the moment. The landscapes where it lived rewarded this approach. Dense forests, scrublands, and shifting mosaics of growth and fire created spaces where sightlines were short and sound traveled unevenly. In such places, speed offered little advantage. The terrain itself broke movement into fragments, slowing both hunter and prey. Stillness, however, blended seamlessly into the background. An animal that could remain motionless, balanced on powerful limbs, could let the world come close without effort. This predator used that stillness as its primary weapon. It read vibrations through the ground, changes in light, subtle movements in foliage. When prey stepped into range, there was no pursuit, only a brief collapse of distance followed by overwhelming force. For animals accustomed to slower dangers or more obvious threats, this method left little room for response. Over time, prey species adapted in small ways, becoming more alert, more cautious, but within a closed system, avoidance could only go so far. Paths still had to be walked. Water still had to be reached. The predator's success lay not in constant killing, but in the ever-present possibility of it. This shaped behavior across the landscape, encouraging hesitancy and silence. It also meant that encounters were rare but final. When they happened, they reshaped the balance of energy and fear in ways that echoed long after. For humans arriving much later, this style of danger was especially difficult to read. Their own evolutionary memory had been shaped in places where predators often announced themselves through pursuit, noise, or numbers. Speed, distance, and early warning had once offered protection. Here, those instincts offered little help. The absence of a chase removed the moment when danger revealed itself. There was no long buildup, no widening gap to measure. Movement through dense terrain brought bodies close to the ground, faces turned downward, attention divided among many tasks. In such conditions, a predator built for sudden force could close the final space before awareness arrived. Human vulnerability was not rooted in weakness, but in mismatch. Bodies built for endurance, walking, and long visibility found themselves in environments that rewarded pause, patience, and silence. The predator did not need to learn new strategies to exploit this. It was already perfected by the land itself. Over generations, humans would slowly adjust, learning through observation and loss how to read the absence of sound, how to avoid certain paths, how to move in ways that acknowledged unseen presence. But during those earliest moments of overlap, the imbalance was stark. This animal was not learning how to hunt people. It was simply being itself, expressing a design refined long before human attention arrived. In that quiet tension, the marsupial lion stood not as an anomaly, but as a natural outcome of isolation, a body shaped by millions of years of uninterrupted logic, waiting patiently in a world that had taught it exactly how to kill. As time pressed forward, and the land continued refining its quiet intensity, another presence took shape that stretched the meaning of predation itself. This was a hunter whose scale altered the way space was used, whose body transformed familiar ground into something newly threatening. Among reptiles, it stood apart, not simply larger, but built to exist at a size where few others could function efficiently. Its length alone shifted perspective, raising its head to a height that met a standing human eye, its body casting shadows that moved slowly across the earth. This was not a creature of quick gestures or restless motion. Every step carried weight, pressing into soil and leaf litter, leaving tracks that told a story of mass rather than speed. Its body balanced power along a long, muscular frame, thick through the torso, reinforced along the limbs, and anchored by a tail that acted as both counterweight and control. When this animal moved, it did not hurry. It did not need to. The land offered few challenges to something so solidly built, and its prey had nowhere to vanish beyond reach. In an environment shaped by drought and uneven abundance, size itself became an advantage, allowing longer intervals between meals and tolerance for heat that would drain smaller bodies too quickly. The sheer presence of this reptile altered the rhythms of life around it, encouraging caution through stillness rather than flight. Because behavior rarely fossilizes, scientists read this animal through clues left behind, patterns etched into bone, teeth, and the landscapes it once inhabited. Its skull reveals a bite built not for precision slicing, but for gripping and holding, jaws capable of anchoring into flesh, while the rest of the body applied force through leverage and mass. Teeth shaped for tearing rather than crushing suggest a methodical approach, subduing prey not in frantic bursts, but through controlled dominance once contact was made. Limb bones show reinforcement where stress would concentrate, hinting at moments of grappling and close contact rather than extended chases. This reptile likely relied on ambush much like other predators on the continent, using cover and patience to shorten the distance before striking. Its senses, tuned to vibration and scent, would have made it aware of movement long before it revealed itself. Once close enough, the encounter would unfold quickly, not because of speed, but because of inevitability. Prey faced an animal that could absorb resistance without yielding, a living structure more than a sprinter. Even scavenging would have been part of its strategy, its size allowing it to dominate carcasses and extract energy others could not access safely. In this way, it blurred the line between hunter and ecosystem force, influencing not only individual lives, but patterns of movement and feeding across wide areas. The success of such a reptile speaks quietly to why reptiles flourished in this land where many mammals struggled. Reptilian bodies, with their lower energy demands and flexible metabolic rhythms, fit naturally into environments defined by scarcity. Where mammals require frequent feeding to sustain constant internal warmth, reptiles can wait. They can slow their internal clocks, enduring long stretches of heat and hunger without collapse. This made large size possible without the same energetic penalties mammals would face. In a place where resources arrived unpredictably, this trait mattered deeply. Reptiles could grow large and remain viable, turning scale into stability rather than risk. Their skin reduced water loss, their physiology tolerated temperature swings, and their behavior aligned with the slow pulse of the land. Over millions of years, these advantages compounded, allowing forms to emerge that would be unsustainable elsewhere. For humans encountering such a presence, the danger felt unfamiliar. There was no warning roar, no sign of pursuit, only the sudden realization that something immense shared the same ground. This reptile did not need to adapt to human behavior. It existed according to rules written long before, rules that valued patience, mass, and certainty. In its shadow, the concept of predator stretched beyond speed or cunning and settled into something heavier, quieter, and profoundly shaped by the ancient logic of Australia itself. As the land continued to shape its predators inward, another transformation unfolded quietly, almost improbably, among creatures usually associated with sky and lightness. In this closed world, wings were not always an advantage. Vast open forests, shifting undergrowth, and fire patterned landscapes rewarded steadiness over lift, and for some birds, the ground offered more opportunity than the air ever could. Over time, flight faded, not suddenly, but through gradual shifts that traded height in the sky for height on land. Bodies grew taller, necks elongated, and legs thickened into pillars capable of carrying great mass across uneven terrain. Feathers remained, but not for flight. They became insulation, display, and camouflage, softening outlines rather than lifting them. These birds did not abandon motion, but they changed its purpose. Speed became a short burst rather than sustained escape, and balance replaced agility. In doing so, they stepped into roles left vacant by the absence of familiar mammalian hunters. Their presence reshaped the idea of what a predator could look like, proving that dominance does not always wear teeth and claws alone. Their size alone altered encounters. Standing taller than many human adults, their mass concentrated in muscular legs and broad bodies, they commanded space through posture and momentum. When they moved, the ground answered, dust rising around their strides, vegetation parting reluctantly. The head, set high on a long neck, brought keen eyesight to bear over grasses and low branches, scanning not with frantic motion, but with steady assessment. Aggression in these birds did not manifest as constant hostility, but as certainty. When challenged or threatened, they did not retreat easily. Powerful legs delivered strikes capable of breaking bone, and thickened skulls absorbed impact without yielding. These were not animals shaped for subtlety. Their presence relied on intimidation and force, turning body mass into a living barrier that prey could not outpace or outmaneuver in close quarters. Unlike mammalian carnivores that relied on cooperative hunting or prolonged pursuit, these birds dominated through presence and reach. A single strike, delivered with precision and weight, could end an encounter before it fully began. The rise of such birds was made possible by the same conditions that shaped other predators on the continent. Without large placental carnivores arriving to claim the role of top hunters, opportunities remained open. Mammals that elsewhere would have filled these niches never arrived in numbers or forms capable of competing. Birds, already adaptable and deeply integrated into the landscape, stepped forward instead. Their digestive systems allowed them to process a wide range of food, giving them flexibility in lean times. Their reproductive strategies, centered on eggs rather than live birth, reduced the risks of carrying young through harsh conditions. Growth could be rapid when resources allowed, and populations could rebound without long dependency periods. In an environment defined by unpredictability, these traits mattered. Over generations, selection favored individuals that could dominate territory, defend resources, and deter competitors through size and aggression rather than speed or stealth. Slowly, the line between herbivore and carnivore blurred. These birds became omnivorous forces, capable of both predation and control, shaping ecosystems through what they consumed and what they excluded. What makes this transformation especially rare is not simply that birds became large or dangerous, but that they assumed roles typically held by mammals across the rest of the world. Elsewhere, mammalian carnivores arrived early, diversifying quickly and occupying apex positions that left little room for alternatives. In Australia's isolated system, that early claim never occurred. The door remained open long enough for birds to step through, guided by the same pressures of scarcity, competition, and isolation that shaped every other lineage. Once established, These birds benefited from the same lack of external correction that allowed other extremes to persist. They did not face invasive rivals adapted to dismantle their strategies. Instead, they refined them, becoming more grounded, more forceful, and more certain over time. Their story illustrates how evolution does not follow a single script. Given space and patience, life will explore paths rarely seen elsewhere, not out of ambition, but because opportunity remains. In Australia, birds became carnivores not because they were destined to, but because nothing stood in their way, and the land quietly rewarded those willing to grow heavy, stand tall, and claim the ground as their own. As the land continued narrowing its strategies, danger found a form that required even less movement than ambush and even less mass than great bodies. In the quiet spaces between scarcity and survival, venom emerged as one of the most refined solutions ever shaped by this continent. Where strength demands constant fuel and speed risks injury, venom offers a different balance. It allows a small body to end an encounter with certainty, transferring the cost of struggle onto chemistry rather than muscle. This shift did not happen suddenly or dramatically. It unfolded slowly, molecule by molecule, as lineages experimented with secretions that irritated, then immobilized, and eventually subdued. In environments where energy was precious and recovery from wounds uncertain, such a strategy carried deep advantages. A successful venomous strike did not require chasing prey across hard ground or grappling in heat that drained stamina. It required patience, proximity, and precision. Once delivered, the venom continued its work without further effort, allowing the animal to withdraw, conserve energy, and wait. Over long stretches of time, this approach rewarded those who could deliver a single, decisive encounter and then remain still. Harsh, dry environments magnified this advantage. Scarcity reduces margins for error. A broken limb or torn muscle can become fatal long before hunger does. In such places, natural selection favors tools that minimize physical conflict. Venom fits this requirement perfectly. It transforms biological processes into weapons, turning internal chemistry into an extension of intent. Heat accelerates these reactions, dryness concentrates them, and the slow pace of life allows their effects to unfold fully. For prey, this creates a silent danger, one that does not announce itself through pursuit or noise. The strike is brief, often unnoticed, until its effects begin spreading inward. For predators, it means safety. Many venomous animals do not need to hold on or overpower their targets. They strike and release, allowing distance and time to complete the interaction. This reduces exposure to retaliation and injury, a critical advantage in landscapes where healing is slow and resources scarce. Over millions of years, such traits did not merely persist, they diversified. Different venoms targeted nerves, blood, or muscle, each adapted to the prey available and the conditions of the land. This variety reflects not excess, but fine-tuning, each formula shaped to work efficiently under specific constraints. Australia's early isolation gave these strategies time to establish themselves before similar solutions could arrive from elsewhere. Without waves of competing predators relying on different methods, venomous lineages found open ecological space. They did not need to outcompete large mammalian carnivores already entrenched in the system. Instead, they expanded quietly, refining delivery systems and chemistry in relative solitude. Over time, venom became woven into the identity of the land, appearing not only on land but in surrounding seas, following the same logic of energy conservation and certainty. This early advantage created a self-reinforcing pattern. As venom proved effective, it reduced the need for size or speed, allowing even small animals to influence the behavior of much larger ones. Prey learned caution through memory and avoidance, rather than direct confrontation. Predators relying on venom did not need numbers or cooperation, only accuracy. This allowed populations to remain low while impact remained high, another form of efficiency that fit the continent's limited resources. One of the most striking aspects of venom as a strategy is its quiet finality. Unlike predators that must pursue, restrain, and overpower, venom often works beyond sight. Once delivered, the predator retreats into stillness while the chemical message travels through the prey's body. Muscles weaken, senses blur, or blood begins to fail, depending on the toxin involved. There is no dramatic struggle that reshapes the landscape. Instead, motion fades inward. For ecosystems, this means fewer disturbances and less wasted energy. For humans arriving much later, it means danger that feels invisible and unpredictable. Without the signals of size or movement, venomous animals challenge perception itself. They ask observers to read absence, to respect what cannot be seen clearly. In Australia, this pattern became deeply ingrained. Death did not always arrive with force or noise. Often, it came quietly, efficiently, and without pursuit, carried on the smallest delivery systems refined by millions of years of isolation and necessity. As venom proved its quiet efficiency on land, the pattern did not remain isolated to a single group or habitat. It spread across lineages, environments, and even into the surrounding seas, becoming a defining thread woven through the continent's living fabric. This was not because life here favored cruelty or excess, but because the land consistently rewarded certainty. In places where energy was scarce and recovery unreliable, evolution leaned away from prolonged struggle and toward outcomes that resolved quickly and decisively. Venom offered that resolution. It allowed animals to bypass the dangers of prolonged combat, turning brief contact into lasting consequence. Over deep time, this advantage became impossible to ignore. Lineages that adopted venom did not need to be larger, faster, or more aggressive. They only needed precision. As these traits accumulated, venom ceased to be an exception and instead became a dominant strategy, reinforced again and again by the same environmental pressures that had shaped everything else on the continent. Snakes exemplify this refinement with particular clarity. Their bodies, elongated and close to the ground, already favored ambush over pursuit. Venom extended this approach beyond physical limits, allowing a single strike to neutralize prey larger and stronger than the snake itself. Because digestion could occur over long periods, there was no urgency to remain exposed after striking. The snake could withdraw into shelter, conserving energy while chemistry completed the work. Spiders followed a similar logic on a smaller scale. Many built lives around stillness, anchoring themselves to silk or burrows, waiting patiently for vibrations that signaled opportunity. Their venom did not need to kill instantly. It only needed to immobilize and begin the slow unraveling of muscle and nerve. Even in marine environments, where movement is constant and escape routes seem endless, venom found a foothold. Along Australia's coasts and reefs, venomous fish, jellyfish, and mollusks evolved defenses and hunting tools that operated invisibly in water. In these systems, venom served both protection and predation, deterring large animals while allowing smaller ones to claim space without constant confrontation. Across land and sea, the same principle repeated. Venom reduced uncertainty. It narrowed encounters into clear outcomes, minimizing risk in environments where mistakes were costly. What unites these diverse animals is not shared ancestry, but shared pressure. Each faced landscapes defined by variability and restraint. Food arrived unpredictably. Heat and dryness imposed strict limits on exertion. Injury carried long shadows. In such conditions, evolution favored mechanisms that shifted danger away from the body and into chemistry. Venom transformed biological processes into external tools, extending influence without requiring physical dominance. This is why venom here is best understood as survival rather than malice. It reflects a long negotiation with scarcity, a compromise that allows life to persist without unnecessary expenditure. The potency of these toxins evolved not from excess violence, but from fine calibration. Each molecule is shaped to act efficiently within specific prey and conditions, conserving effort while ensuring success. In this way, venom aligns closely with the broader rhythm of the continent. It is precise where resources are limited, restrained where waste cannot be afforded. This pattern persists today because the underlying pressures remain. While climates have shifted and species have come and gone, the fundamental challenges of the land endure. Drought still stretches ecosystems thin. Heat still favors strategies that reduce exertion. Injury still carries long consequences. Modern species inherit not just physical traits, but evolutionary memory written into their biology. Venom remains effective because it continues to meet the same needs it always has. It allows small animals to coexist with larger ones. It reduces the need for constant movement. It resolves encounters quietly, often unseen. For humans, this legacy can feel unsettling as it challenges assumptions about what danger looks like. Yet within the deeper context of the land, it makes profound sense. Australia became the world capital of venom, not through accident or excess, but through patience. Given millions of years to refine certainty over struggle, life here chose the path that wasted the least and endured the longest, leaving a living system where danger is concentrated, efficient, and enduringly subtle. Long before human hands carried flame across this continent, fire already moved through it with quiet regularity. It arrived with lightning and heat, sparked by dry air and restless skies, returning again and again as seasons leaned toward scarcity. These fires were not intrusions into a stable world. They were part of its rhythm, as predictable as drought and renewal. Over deep time, life did not merely endure this pattern, it learned from it. Ash settled into soil, opening space and releasing nutrients, while older growth gave way to light and possibility. Fire moved like a slow breath across the land, sometimes fierce, sometimes gentle, but always present enough to shape memory in every lineage that survived it. In this environment, stillness could be as dangerous as motion, and permanence became a liability rather than a virtue. Plants were among the first to respond fully to this reality. Instead of resisting fire, many learned to invite it. Bark thickened into protective armor, insulating living tissue from heat. Seeds developed the ability to wait patiently beneath the surface, sealed until flame passed overhead and signaled the right moment to emerge. Oils accumulated in leaves, not by accident, but through selection that favored those whose burning cleared space faster and more completely. When fire moved through these plants, it did not end their lineage. It advanced it. Regrowth followed quickly, often more vigorous than before, fed by the nutrients released through destruction. In this way, fire became less an enemy and more a collaborator, pruning the landscape and resetting competition on terms the plants themselves had helped define. Over generations, This strategy reshaped entire regions. Forests and scrublands became mosaics of age and openness, each patch carrying a different memory of flame, each influencing which animals could move, hide, or hunt within it. As vegetation adapted, animals followed, adjusting their lives to a world where change arrived not gradually, but suddenly. Burrows deepened, offering refuge beneath heat and smoke. Mobility became important, not for chasing prey, but for retreat and return. Many species learned to read the land after fire, recognizing where new growth would appear and where cover would be scarce. Predators adapted their timing, understanding that freshly burned areas exposed movement while regrowth created dense refuge. Fire did not erase danger, it rearranged it. This constant reshaping prevented any single strategy from becoming fixed forever. Survival demanded flexibility, not once, but repeatedly across generations. Those that could not adjust vanished quietly, while those that could learned to exist in a world that never promised consistency. Even large animals were shaped by this pattern, moving with the cycles of burn and bloom, their paths traced by memory rather than permanence. This dynamic landscape reinforced the broader theme that had been shaping Australia for millions of years. Efficiency mattered, waste did not. Fire cleared what no longer served the system, making room for what could respond quickly and decisively. In such a world, adaptation was not a singular event. It was an ongoing conversation with the land, renewed each time flames passed through. Species that thrived here did so not because they dominated the environment, but because they listened to it. They learned when to retreat, when to return, and how to rebuild with minimal expense. This applied not only to bodies, but to behavior. Movement patterns, feeding times, and reproductive cycles all bent around the presence of fire, aligning with windows of safety and opportunity that opened briefly before shifting again. Fire also acted as a subtle equalizer. It prevented unchecked growth from suffocating diversity and ensured that dominance remained temporary. In doing so, it maintained the tension that defined the continent. Nothing here was allowed to settle into comfort for long. Even the most successful strategies were tested again and again, refined through repetition rather than erased through catastrophe. This constant pressure produced ecosystems that felt alive with readiness, always poised for change. By the time humans would encounter this land, fire had already written its lessons deeply into the soil and its inhabitants. Survival was never about resisting destruction. It was about moving with it, adapting continuously to a world that burned not by mistake, but by design. As fire shaped the land through cycles of clearing and renewal, another force worked alongside it more quietly, stretching time and patience until survival itself became an exercise in endurance. Drought was not an interruption here, it was a constant presence, woven into the background of every ecosystem, arriving without pattern or promise. Rainfall came and went in ways that resisted prediction, sometimes flooding dry ground into sudden abundance, then retreating for years at a time. Rivers swelled and vanished. Lakes appeared briefly, then dissolved into salt and dust. Life could not plan around such instability. Instead, it learned to exist within it, adapting to a world where water was never guaranteed and recovery could not be assumed. In this environment, waiting became as important as action, and restraint became a form of strength. The rhythm of boom and bust defined every living system on the continent. When rains arrived, growth surged quickly. Plants flowered and seeded with urgency. Insects emerged in clouds. Herbivores multiplied, and predators followed, drawn by abundance that felt almost reckless in its intensity. but these periods were brief. As moisture faded, the land tightened again, pulling resources back into itself. Vegetation thinned, prey numbers dropped, competition sharpened. Animals that had flourished only months before faced sudden limits, and those that could not shift their behavior quickly enough disappeared. This constant oscillation prevented stability from ever settling in. No population could rely on long-term abundance. Every success carried the memory of collapse, shaping behavior long after conditions improved. Over generations, this pattern selected for species that could endure extremes without breaking, favoring bodies and strategies that functioned under scarcity as effectively as they did in abundance. Scarcity intensified danger in subtle but pervasive ways. When resources are plentiful, encounters can be avoided. Prey can scatter, predators can afford to fail. In drought, space contracts. Waterholes become meeting points rather than refuges, drawing multiple species into close proximity. Hunger reduces caution, pushing animals to take risks they would otherwise avoid. Under these conditions, aggression becomes less a personality trait and more a survival tool. When opportunities are rare, hesitation carries its own cost. Predators that strike decisively secure meals that might not be replaced for long periods. Even herbivores display heightened aggression, defending access to dwindling vegetation or water with force. This escalation does not create chaos, it creates clarity. Interactions become direct, outcomes more final. The landscape itself encourages this, offering fewer buffers and fewer chances for retreat. Over time, such pressures shape not only behavior, but physiology. Muscles favor bursts of power, senses sharpen toward detecting opportunity and threat at close range. Endurance gives way to immediacy. This environment also reshaped social strategies. Cooperative hunting or long-term group living can be effective in stable systems, but under unpredictable drought, such arrangements risk collapse. Resources that support many individuals may vanish too quickly, leaving groups vulnerable. As a result, many species favored solitary or loosely connected lives, reducing competition within their own ranks. Territoriality became intense but flexible, expanding during abundance and contracting sharply when drought returned. Aggression, in this context, was not constant hostility, it was readiness. The ability to defend space or seize opportunity without prolonged negotiation. These traits accumulated quietly over millions of years, reinforcing a pattern where danger felt concentrated and immediate rather than diffuse and delayed. For humans arriving much later, this legacy of drought shaped every interaction with the land. The absence of reliable water pathways and predictable seasons made movement hazardous. The same forces that had refined predators and prey now tested human adaptability, rewarding those who observed, remembered, and respected the land's rhythms. Drought did not simply limit life, it refined it, sharpening responses and amplifying consequences. In a place where scarcity was permanent, aggression became one of many tools evolution used to ensure survival. Not as cruelty, but as efficiency. The land did not encourage excess, it demanded readiness. And in that demand, it made every encounter more dangerous, every choice more weighted, shaping a living world defined by tension, restraint, and enduring adaptation. As drought and fire tightened their long grip on the continent, another force quietly amplified their effects, not through predation, but through appetite. Giant herbivores moved across the land like slow weather systems, reshaping ecosystems simply by existing at scale. Their bodies demanded enormous quantities of plant matter, and their movements pressed paths into soil, crushed seedlings, and opened clearings where forests might otherwise have closed in. Feeding was not gentle grazing, it was removal. Branches snapped, bark stripped, and whole patches of vegetation were reduced to stubble. Over time, this pressure altered which plants could persist. Species that grew slowly or relied on uninterrupted maturity faded, while those that could regenerate quickly, sprout from protected roots, or recover after damage gained advantage. The land became tougher, lower, and more resilient, but also more exposed. Shade thinned, moisture escaped more quickly. What remained was vegetation shaped to survive being eaten repeatedly, reinforcing a cycle where softness disappeared and only the hardiest forms endured. This constant pressure rippled outward into every corner of the ecosystem. When vegetation became sparse or uneven, smaller herbivores were forced to travel farther between meals, increasing exposure to danger. Water sources, already limited by drought, became even more critical as large bodies drained them quickly. Soil compacted under heavy steps, changing drainage patterns and further influencing where plants could grow. These changes did not require intention. They emerged naturally from size and number, each step compounding across generations. The giants did not need to overrun the land to transform it, simply persisting was enough. Their presence created landscapes that favored openness over cover, endurance over delicacy, and regrowth over stability. In doing so, they quietly raised the stakes for every other species sharing their space. Predators responded as evolution often does, not with balance, but with escalation. Larger prey requires greater force to subdue, and as herbivores grew heavier and more resistant, the selective pressure shifted upward. Predators that could deliver decisive power gained access to food sources others could not exploit. Over time, bodies adjusted, limbs strengthened, jaws deepened. Hunting strategies adapted to target the young, the weak, or the isolated, further shaping herbivore behavior in return. This feedback loop did not create harmony, it concentrated risk. As predators scaled up to meet the challenge of larger prey, encounters became more consequential. Success brought vast energy rewards. Failure carried severe cost. The system favored predators capable of ending interactions quickly, reinforcing the same patterns already encouraged by drought, fire, and isolation. Danger multiplied, not because predators became more numerous, but because each interaction carried greater weight. The presence of giant herbivores also reduced the margin for error across the landscape. When vegetation was stripped thin, recovery time lengthened. A missed season of rain or an intense fire could push already stressed areas beyond their capacity to rebound. This heightened vulnerability magnified the impact of every predator and every environmental shift. Small disruptions cascaded into large consequences. In such conditions, survival favored not moderation, but readiness. Predators that hesitated lost opportunity. Herbivores that lingered faced exhaustion or attack. Even plants were shaped by this intensity, evolving defenses not only against fire and drought, but against relentless feeding. Thorns, toxins, and rapid regrowth became common responses, adding another layer of challenge for both grazers and browsers. Each adaptation tightened the system further, leaving little room for softness or delay. For humans entering this already strained landscape much later, the compounded danger was not immediately obvious. The giants themselves may have seemed slow or avoidable, but their influence was everywhere. Paths cleared by feeding herds exposed travelers. Water sources depleted faster than expected. Predators drawn to large prey learned to patrol the same routes humans used. Danger became indirect and persistent, embedded in patterns rather than individuals. The land bore the marks of immense bodies long after they passed, shaping risk through absence as much as presence. In this way, giant herbivores made everything worse not through aggression, but through scale. By reshaping the land and forcing predators to escalate, they multiplied danger quietly, turning an already harsh continent into a place where every step carried the accumulated weight of size, hunger, and long evolutionary pressure. By the time humans finally set foot on this continent, the land was already old in its habits and deeply settled in its patterns. The arrival came relatively late in Earth's long human story, after countless generations had already learned to survive deserts, forests, and coasts elsewhere. Here, the timing mattered. People arrived after millions of years of uninterrupted evolution had shaped a closed system, one that had refined its dangers without reference to human behavior. The animals did not know people, and people did not know the animals. There was no shared history to soften the encounter, no slow coevolution to build mutual warning signs. The meeting happened abruptly, like two stories crossing mid-sentence. Humans stepped onto a land that was not empty, not waiting, and not adaptable to newcomers. It was already complete. This completeness created an immediate imbalance of risk. In Africa and parts of Eurasia, humans had grown alongside large predators for hundreds of thousands of years. Bodies, instincts, and social behaviors carried the memory of being hunted. Upright posture scanned open plains. Group movement discouraged ambush. Fire, noise, and pattern recognition had been tested again and again against familiar threats. In Australia, those instincts met something entirely different. Predators here did not advertise themselves through long pursuits or loud displays. Danger arrived through silence, stillness, and sudden proximity. Venom operated without chase. Ambush unfolded in dense cover rather than open space. Even large animals moved in ways that did not match inherited expectations. Human senses searched for signs that were often absent, while missing cues that mattered deeply in this landscape. What protected people elsewhere offered little guidance here. The land itself added to this disorientation. Water did not follow consistent paths. Vegetation changed rapidly across short distances. Fire and drought reshaped terrain in ways that made memory unreliable. A route that felt safe one season could become exposed or hostile the next. The familiar human strategy of learning through repetition carried new risks when conditions shifted faster than knowledge could accumulate. Early groups entered an environment that demanded immediate awareness rather than gradual understanding. Every sound, every movement through grass or scrub carried meaning that had yet to be learned. Survival depended not on dominance, but on attention. Even simple acts such as resting, gathering, or traveling required recalibration. The land did not meet humans halfway. It offered no buffer period. Despite this imbalance, humans endured, not because the ecosystem made room for them, but because they learned to occupy its edges. Small group sizes reduced pressure on resources. Movement remained flexible, allowing retreat when conditions changed. Fire was adopted not as conquest, but as communication with the land, aligning human behavior with patterns already present. Knowledge became cumulative and carefully guarded, passed through story and observation rather than force. Over time, people learned where danger gathered, how animals behaved after fire or rain, and how absence could signal threat as clearly as presence. This learning, however, came at cost. Early survival was not guaranteed. Loss shaped memory. Caution replaced confidence. The land taught its rules patiently, but without mercy. What makes this moment in the story so striking is not that humans eventually adapted, but that they did so without rewriting the system they entered. They did not displace the continent's logic, they adjusted themselves to it. Predators remained efficient. Venom retained its quiet authority. Drought and fire continued their cycles. Humans became one more participant in a system not designed for them, rather than its architects. This required restraint, observation, and humility, qualities that had not always been necessary elsewhere. The continent did not respond to ambition, it responded to attentiveness. In this way, the arrival of humans marked not a turning point for the land, but a turning point for humanity within it. The ecosystem did not bend, it absorbed. Those who survived did so by learning the difference between environments shaped by familiarity and those shaped by isolation. Australia was not hostile because it resisted humans, it was hostile because it had no reason to recognize them at all. What made this land especially unforgiving to early humans was not only the presence of danger, but the absence of anything that announced it. The instincts people carried with them had been shaped far away, refined in landscapes where threats revealed themselves through movement, sound, or distance. In open plains and woodlands elsewhere, danger often came with advance notice. A shift in grass, a ripple of motion, the rhythm of pursuit gave the body time to respond. Muscles tightened, groups gathered, voices rose. Those cues had guided survival for generations. Here, they failed quietly. Australia's predators did not rely on visible charge or drawn-out chase. Many blended so completely into their surroundings that the boundary between animal and landscape blurred. Stillness was not the absence of danger, but its most perfected form. For humans trained to read motion, this silence offered false reassurance. Camouflage played a powerful role in this imbalance. Bodies matched bark, stone, and shadow with uncanny precision. Feathers, fur, and scales broke outlines into fragments that disappeared when the animal stopped moving. In dappled light and dense vegetation, vision became unreliable. What looked like empty ground could contain intent and readiness. Even large predators did not always announce themselves through size. Their shapes folded inward, waiting close to the earth. Venomous animals added another layer of invisibility, their threat residing not in posture or sound, but in brief contact that left no immediate trace. To a human eye, trained to watch horizons and follow movement, much of this danger remained unreadable. The land did not highlight its risks, it concealed them. Sound, too, offered little guidance. In many ecosystems, warning cries ripple outward when predators move, a shared alarm that signals time to retreat. Here, silence often persisted until the moment of encounter. Ambush predators learned to move without disturbing air or leaf. Venomous creatures had no need to chase or corner. They waited. For humans, this meant that familiar strategies, like scanning distance or listening for disturbance, provided limited protection. Danger arrived at close range, sometimes already unfolding by the time it registered. Reaction replaced anticipation, and that shift carried cost. Learning in such an environment could not be gradual. Elsewhere, near misses often taught lessons without fatal consequence. A missed charge, a distant roar, or a failed hunt left memory intact. In this land, encounters tended to be decisive. Mistakes were not always survivable. Knowledge came through loss, carried forward by those who observed what had gone wrong. Over time, patterns began to emerge. Certain places demanded caution regardless of appearance. Certain silences meant absence rather than safety. Movement after fire differed from movement in old growth. These lessons accumulated slowly, woven into story, habit, and restraint. They were not intuitive. They had to be earned. This process reshaped human behavior profoundly. Confidence gave way to attentiveness. Speed yielded to patience. Group movement became quieter, paths more deliberate. The body learned new cues. Subtle shifts in bird behavior, the absence of insects, changes in wind that carried unfamiliar scent. Knowledge replaced instinct where instinct failed. Over generations, people adapted not by overpowering the system, but by learning to interpret it. Survival did not come from changing the land, it came from listening more carefully to what it was already saying. Yet, even as understanding grew, the lack of a built in warning system never fully disappeared. Australia did not evolve alongside humans, and it never adjusted its signals to suit them. The burden remained on people to remain alert, to remember that danger did not always look dramatic or feel immediate. This shaped a different relationship with risk, one grounded in respect rather than assumption. The land did not reward boldness, it rewarded awareness. In that quiet exchange, humans slowly carved out a place for themselves, not because the continent became safer, but because they learned to move within a world where danger rarely announced itself, and survival depended on reading what could not be seen. As humans spent generations learning how danger hid itself in this land, one tool slowly emerged as something more than warmth or light. Fire, long familiar yet newly understood, became a way to speak back to the continent rather than push against it. This was not the roaring blaze of conquest seen elsewhere, meant to clear and claim. It was smaller, intentional, and attentive. Controlled burns followed patterns already written into the landscape, echoing the rhythms shaped by lightning and drought long before human arrival. When used carefully, fire opened ground without stripping it bare, reduced dense undergrowth that concealed silent threats, and encouraged fresh growth that drew animals into predictable paths. In this way, fire became less a weapon and more a language, a way of signaling presence and intent to a land that responded to such cues. These early burns were guided by observation rather than force. Humans learned that timing mattered more than intensity. A fire lit too hot or too often could exhaust the soil and invite erosion, while a cool, measured burn refreshed grasses and cleared leaf litter without harming larger trees. Smoke carried meaning, altering animal movement and behavior without direct confrontation. Predators accustomed to ambush found fewer places to hide. Venomous animals retreated from heat, creating temporary corridors of safety. Fire did not eliminate danger, it redistributed it, shaping when and where risks gathered. This subtle control offered humans something they had lacked since arriving, a way to influence their immediate surroundings without challenging the deeper logic of the ecosystem. Importantly, this use of fire was protective rather than domineering. It did not seek to remake the land into something unfamiliar. Instead, it worked within the land's existing tendencies, reinforcing cycles already present. Burning reduced the intensity of larger fires later, breaking continuous fuel into patches and giving life space to recover gradually. In doing so, it aligned human survival with the health of the landscape itself. Vegetation returned richer and more diverse. Herbivores followed new growth, and predators followed them, creating patterns that could be anticipated. Knowledge replaced brute force. Fire became a way to read and guide movement, turning unpredictability into something slightly more manageable. Through this practice, humans began to coexist rather than compete. Camps were placed in areas shaped by past burns, where visibility improved and resources renewed consistently. Travel routes followed mosaics of burned and unburned land, reducing surprise encounters and conserving energy. Over time, fire management wove itself into culture and memory, taught through story and repetition rather than written rule. Each burn carried lessons about wind, moisture, and season, passed down and refined across generations. Fire was no longer just an external element, it became part of human presence, a shared rhythm between people and place. This relationship shifted how danger was experienced. Instead of responding only after threat appeared, humans could shape the conditions that allowed danger to remain hidden. Fire cleared not only vegetation, but uncertainty. It offered moments of breathing room in a land that rarely allowed it. Yet, even with this tool, dominance was never complete. Controlled burns required patience and restraint, an understanding of limits. Fire could protect, but misused, it could undo hard earned stability. This balance reinforced humility. The land remained in control. Humans were participants, not masters. Through fire, early coexistence became possible. Not easy, not safe, but workable. It allowed human communities to reduce risk without erasing the character of the continent. Danger persisted, but it became legible. Fire revealed what had been hidden and reminded humans that survival here depended on listening as much as acting. In learning to burn with care, humanity found its first true defense in Australia, not by overwhelming the land, but by joining its ancient conversation and moving in step with forces far older than themselves. After countless generations of quiet coexistence, the balance that had held for so long began to thin. The giants that once moved like living landscapes themselves did not vanish in a single dramatic moment. Their disappearance unfolded unevenly, across centuries rather than days. Yet compared to the deep time that shaped them, it was sudden. Massive bodies that had endured drought, fire, and long isolation now faced pressures arriving from more than one direction at once. Climate continued its restless shifts, tightening water availability and shortening periods of abundance, while human presence added a new and unfamiliar layer of strain. Neither force alone fully explains what followed. Together, they narrowed the margins until survival became unlikely, even for creatures built to endure scarcity. As humans spread across the continent, they did not need to hunt giants relentlessly to alter their fate. Even limited predation focused on slow reproducing animals carried long consequences. Large herbivores invest years into growth and generations into stability. Removing even a few adults disrupted social structures and reduced the resilience of populations already stressed by changing conditions. At the same time, human use of fire, though largely careful and aligned with natural rhythms, altered vegetation patterns in ways that favored some plants over others. Subtle shifts in food availability accumulated. Routes that once supported seasonal movement changed. Water sources became more contested. The giants found themselves navigating landscapes that no longer responded in the ways they had evolved to expect. Climate variability amplified these challenges. Dry periods lengthened, recovery windows shortened. What had once been manageable fluctuations became compounding setbacks. As megafauna declined, the land itself began to change. Without constant grazing and trampling, vegetation thickened in some areas and vanished in others. Certain plants spread unchecked, while others that relied on disturbance or dispersal through large bodies faded. Fire behavior shifted as fuel loads changed, sometimes burning hotter, sometimes skipping areas that once renewed regularly. Soil compacted differently, altering drainage and nutrient flow. These transformations did not occur uniformly. They rippled across ecosystems, creating new patterns that favored smaller, more flexible species. The loss of the giants removed a stabilizing force that had moderated extremes, leaving behind landscapes that fluctuated more sharply between abundance and scarcity. Predators, too, felt the absence. Those that had scaled their bodies and strategies around large prey found their foundations eroding. Fewer encounters meant longer periods without food. Energetic costs rose. Some adapted by shifting to smaller prey, while others declined alongside their former targets. Apex roles that had once been held by powerful specialists became untenable. The web of life did not collapse all at once, but it loosened, strand by strand. Predators that relied on certainty faced uncertainty instead. The same efficiency that once made them formidable now limited their flexibility. As prey collapsed, predators followed, not through sudden extinction alone, but through dwindling presence and fading influence. For humans living through this transition, the change may have felt subtle at first. The land still appeared vast, animals remained present, yet over generations, the absence of familiar giants altered daily experience. Paths once worn by heavy steps softened. Encounters grew quieter. Some dangers receded, while others emerged in new forms. Smaller, more secretive threats persisted, filling the spaces left behind. The continent did not become gentle, it became different. The loss of megafauna reshaped the emotional weight of the landscape, replacing visible power with quiet tension. This collapse was not the result of a single failure or mistake. It was the outcome of overlapping pressures, meeting systems already operating near their limits. Isolation had created specialization. Drought and fire had sharpened efficiency. Giants had amplified both resilience and risk. When humans arrived amid shifting climates, the balance tipped. What followed was not a catastrophe in the human sense, but a reorganization. The land adjusted, as it always had, carrying forward only what could endure the new conditions. In the long night after the giants faded, Australia entered another phase of its story, quieter in size but no less intense in its demands, shaped by the echoes of enormous lives that once defined its rhythms. After the giants faded and the land settled into a quieter shape, something unexpected became clear. Danger had not disappeared. It had condensed. The creatures that endured were not those that relied on size or spectacle, but those that had always lived close to the margins, conserving energy and waiting with intention. Small bodies, often overlooked, carried strategies perfectly matched to a world still ruled by drought, heat, and uncertainty. Venomous, patient, and precise, these animals did not need abundance to survive. They needed only time, accuracy, and restraint. In the long aftermath of ecological upheaval, these qualities mattered more than ever. Low energy requirements became a defining advantage. In a land where food pulses arrived unpredictably and recovery could be slow, the cost of maintaining large bodies grew too high. Smaller animals could wait through lean seasons without collapse. Their metabolisms allowed long pauses between meals. Many could shelter underground or remain motionless for extended periods, reducing exposure to heat and predators alike. This ability to slow life down, to exist quietly within harsh conditions, transformed scarcity from a threat into a background constant. While larger species struggled to meet daily demands, these survivors simply endured, drawing little from the land and asking even less in return. Venom amplified this efficiency. It allowed small animals to influence much larger ones without physical struggle. A brief encounter, sometimes lasting only a heartbeat, could determine the outcome, after which the venomous animal could withdraw and wait. There was no need for pursuit, no need for dominance displays or prolonged effort. Chemistry replaced muscle, precision replaced force. In ecosystems recalibrated by loss, this method proved remarkably resilient. Even as prey species changed and landscapes shifted, venom remained effective because it did not depend on specific targets. It worked wherever nervous systems and blood flowed, adapting subtly through time to new conditions. Patience completed the strategy. These animals were not rushed by hunger. They could afford to remain hidden, letting opportunity arrive on its own terms. Survival through efficiency reshaped the character of danger itself. Where once threat arrived in the form of massive bodies moving through the landscape, it now resided in stillness and subtlety. Danger became harder to see, harder to predict, and harder to avoid through simple awareness. The land felt quieter, yet more tightly wound. Fewer encounters occurred, but those that did carried sharper consequence. This shift did not make the ecosystem more chaotic. It made it more exacting. Every interaction mattered. Every movement carried weight. The absence of giants removed noise and spectacle, leaving behind a landscape where survival hinged on reading small signs and respecting invisible boundaries. These enduring species benefited from flexibility as well. Many could adjust their diets, habitats, and behaviors without radical change to their bodies. They occupied spaces close to the ground, along rocks, within leaf litter, or beneath soil, places buffered from extreme heat and fire. When conditions worsened, they retreated inward. When opportunity returned, they emerged quietly. This responsiveness allowed them to ride out fluctuations that eliminated more specialized forms. In a world that continued to shift, adaptability became more valuable than dominance. For humans sharing this transformed land, the persistence of these deadly creatures reinforced a lasting lesson. Threat no longer announced itself through size or sound. It lingered in absence, in silence, in places where attention drifted. The shrinking of danger in scale did not reduce its intensity, it heightened it. Smaller forms allowed danger to disperse more widely, occupying many niches instead of a few obvious ones. This made safety less about avoiding large predators and more about constant awareness. It also meant that danger rarely came from intention or aggression. It emerged naturally from efficiency, from systems that had been refined over millions of years to waste nothing. In this way, the aftermath of collapse did not soften Australia, it distilled it. The land retained its unforgiving character, but expressed it through quieter means. The deadliest creatures survived not because they were ruthless, but because they were economical. They asked little, waited long, and acted decisively. As the ecosystem reorganized, these qualities allowed them to remain, shaping a world where danger was no longer towering and obvious, but small, patient, and deeply woven into the fabric of everyday life. After the age of towering predators passed and the heaviest shadows lifted from the land, Australia did not become calmer in the way one might expect. Instead, it grew quieter. The landscapes began a slow adjustment, responding to the absence of forces that had once shaped vegetation through weight, movement, and hunger. Without massive bodies breaking branches and clearing paths, plants filled space differently. Some areas grew denser, others thinner, depending on soil, fire, and water. Grasses spread where heavy grazing once held them low, while shrubs claimed ground that had been trampled for generations. This was not a return to balance, but a reconfiguration. The land did not forget the giants quickly. Their influence lingered in soil compaction, seed distribution, and the patterns of fire they had helped shape. Over time, new rhythms emerged, quieter but still demanding attention. As the environment shifted, humans adjusted alongside it. Survival no longer depended on reacting to large, obvious threats moving through open ground. Instead, it required a deepening understanding of place. Knowledge became the primary tool. Stories preserved memory of dangerous sites, seasonal changes, and the subtle signs that preceded risk. Movement across the land followed inherited pathways shaped by experience rather than instinct alone. Fire continued to be used with care, not to dominate space, but to maintain clarity and safety within it. Camps, travel routes, and gathering areas reflected long observation, favoring visibility and predictability. Strength still mattered, but it was no longer the defining factor. Wisdom, restraint, and attention carried greater weight. Cultural adaptation filled the gap left by the loss of apex predators. Where physical power once dictated outcomes, shared understanding now guided behavior. Children learned early how to read the land, how to notice absence as much as presence. Songs, rituals, and stories held information about water, weather, and animals, encoding survival strategies into memory rather than muscle. This transfer of knowledge allowed people to thrive in a world where danger rarely announced itself. The land rewarded those who listened closely and punished those who assumed familiarity. In this way, human culture became an extension of the ecosystem, another adaptive layer responding to the same pressures that shaped plants and animals. Danger did not vanish with the apex predators. It changed form. Without large hunters to draw attention, risk became more diffuse. Smaller, efficient threats occupied many niches, hiding in grass, under stones, or along shorelines. Encounters were less dramatic, but more frequent, woven into daily movement rather than rare confrontations. This subtle danger required constant awareness rather than episodic caution. The absence of obvious menace made vigilance a permanent state rather than a reaction. Humans learned to move gently, to pause often, and to treat unfamiliar spaces with respect. Safety was found not through conquest, but through alignment with the land's quiet signals. This period marked a shift in the relationship between people and place. Australia was no longer a stage for grand clashes between massive creatures. It became a landscape of detail. Small changes in wind, light, or sound carried information. The environment asked for patience and offered little forgiveness for inattention. Over generations, this fostered a form of coexistence grounded in humility. People did not seek to reshape the land into something easier. They adapted themselves instead, refining behavior and memory to fit a world that had already defined its rules. In the long calm that followed the age of apex predators, Australia revealed another face of its danger. It was not softened by the loss of giants, only distilled. The land continued to demand respect, just in quieter ways. Strength yielded to understanding, noise yielded to stillness. And in that stillness, both humans and ecosystems found a way to persist together, bound not by dominance, but by shared attention to the subtle forces that continued to shape life on this ancient continent. As the last echoes of towering bodies faded from the land, the character of danger shifted in a way that was easy to miss but impossible to escape. Where once risk announced itself through sound, mass, and movement, it now settled into quieter forms. The absence of giants did not leave emptiness, it left room. Into that space stepped threats that did not rely on size or spectacle, but on concealment and timing. Death no longer moved openly across plains or through forests. It waited. It rested beneath stones, within grasses, along shallow waters, and among reefs that shimmered with beauty while carrying hidden consequence. The land did not become safer, it became subtler. Stealth replaced presence as the dominant language of danger. Smaller predators, long overshadowed by massive forms, thrived in this new quiet. Snakes traced warmth through sand and leaf litter, bodies blending so completely with earth and shadow that stillness erased their outline. Spiders occupied corners, burrows, and webs placed with careful intent, their lives unfolding patiently at the edges of perception. In the surrounding seas, marine creatures carried similar strategies forward, drifting or hiding among coral and tide, their venom or spines turning accidental contact into decisive outcome. These animals did not need to chase or confront. Their success lay in being overlooked until it was too late. This shift altered how risk was distributed. Instead of rare encounters with overwhelming force, the land now carried many small points of tension, spread across daily movement and ordinary places. To human senses, this made danger feel quieter and less dramatic. There were fewer moments of sudden awe or terror. No ground-shaking footsteps, no distant silhouettes dominating the horizon. Instead, threat arrived through subtle signs easily ignored, a slight change in texture underfoot, a momentary stillness where sound should have been, a brush against something unseen. Modern danger often feels understated because it no longer demands attention to size or power. It demands attention to detail. The landscape asks those who move through it to slow down, to look closely, and to accept that safety is not always visible. In this way, the absence of giants increased the need for awareness rather than reducing it. These quieter dangers are not new creations. They are ancient patterns carried forward, refined long before humans arrived. Venom, patience, and concealment were already successful strategies in a land shaped by scarcity and restraint. When larger predators vanished, these traits simply rose in prominence, filling ecological space without changing their fundamental nature. The same logic that once supported ambush hunters in forests or patient predators along waterholes now sustains snakes in dry grasslands and marine animals along coasts. The continuity is not accidental. It reflects a system that has always favored efficiency over excess. When energy is precious, subtlety outperforms spectacle. This persistence gives modern Australia its distinctive character. The land feels calm on the surface, vast and open, yet layered with invisible lines of caution. Beaches glow under sunlight, forests rustle gently, and deserts stretch with quiet beauty. Beneath this calm, ancient strategies continue their work. Venom circulates in bodies evolved to waste nothing. Patience stretches across hours or days without strain. Stealth allows danger to exist without reshaping the landscape around it. The result is an environment where threat rarely announces itself, but remains constantly possible. For those who live within this system, understanding replaces fear. Danger becomes something to respect rather than dramatize. Cultural memory, observation, and careful movement remain the most effective responses. The shift from obvious death to invisible death did not mark an ending, it marked a refinement. Australia carried its evolutionary lessons forward, distilling them into smaller forms that fit the same constraints. The giants may be gone, but the logic that shaped them remains, quieter now, woven into everyday spaces where ancient patterns continue to move patiently through the world. Even now, long after the giants have vanished and human presence has spread across the continent, Australia still carries itself differently. The feeling is subtle, not easily named, but persistent. It emerges in the way the land looks open yet demanding, calm yet alert. This difference is not imagined, and it is not created by modern storytelling or exaggeration. It is the living legacy of ancient evolution, a continuity that never fully broke. The forces that once shaped the most extreme versions of life here did not disappear when those forms faded. They softened, narrowed, and refined themselves, remaining present in quieter ways that continue to influence how the land behaves and how it is experienced. Fire still moves through the continent as a shaping force, not as an interruption but as a rhythm. Landscapes bear the marks of past burns, some recent, some old enough to have settled into memory. Vegetation grows with the expectation of flame, recovering quickly, shedding and returning in patterns that feel deliberate. Drought still presses unevenly, arriving without ceremony, stretching systems thin and reminding every living thing that abundance is temporary. Water remains precious, guiding movement and shaping behavior across vast distances. Venom still circulates through ecosystems, carried by animals that rarely seek attention yet command respect through their efficiency. None of these forces dominate in the dramatic ways they once did, but together they maintain the same underlying tension that defined the continent for millions of years. This is why the modern experience of Australia often feels heightened without being overtly dangerous. The land does not constantly threaten, it quietly insists. Safety depends less on force and more on awareness, less on control and more on understanding. Even in places shaped by roads, cities, and fences, the deeper patterns remain close to the surface. Weather turns quickly. Fire reshapes familiar ground. Animals move with an independence that feels older than human planning. These impressions are not echoes of a vanished world, but continuations of one that never truly reset. Where other continents experienced repeated interruptions through ice, migration, and competition, this land carried its history forward with fewer breaks, allowing ancient strategies to persist into the present. Because of this continuity, perception of Australia as uniquely harsh is not an exaggeration, it is an intuitive response to genuine difference. The land rewards attentiveness rather than confidence. It offers beauty without promising comfort. These qualities can feel unsettling to those accustomed to environments shaped around predictability and buffer. In Australia, margins are thinner, systems run lean. Recovery happens, but it does not always arrive on human timelines. This reality shapes not just ecosystems, but culture and identity, influencing how people relate to space, risk, and responsibility. What exists today is not the brutal intensity of the distant past, but a softened echo of it. The extremes have been scaled down, not erased. Giant predators no longer patrol the land, but small, efficient dangers remain. Massive herbivores no longer reshape vegetation through weight alone, but the land still responds strongly to pressure. Fire no longer burns unchecked across entire regions as often, yet it continues to influence planning and memory. The echoes are quieter, more refined, but unmistakably connected to what came before. They give the continent a sense of depth, as though multiple eras are layered close together rather than separated by time. Living in or visiting Australia often brings a feeling of respect that arises naturally, without instruction. This respect is not born from fear, but from recognition. The land does not behave as though it exists for human convenience. It carries its own priorities, shaped long before people arrived, and maintained long after major changes occurred. Understanding this context reveals that the continent has not become less itself. It has simply learned to express its ancient character in ways that fit the present. The danger is quieter, the forces are restrained, yet the same evolutionary logic remains at work, reminding those who pay attention that this land was never meant to be gentle, only enduring. When Australia is placed beside other continents, its difference becomes clearer not through spectacle, but through contrast. Africa offers one kind of balance, shaped by constant interaction between predators and prey that evolved alongside one another over immense spans of time. Large carnivores there did not arrive late or in isolation. They emerged early and diversified together, refining speed, cooperation, and warning signals in a shared evolutionary dialogue. Prey learned to read danger through movement and distance. Predators learned restraint through competition. This long coexistence produced ecosystems where threat is visible and often negotiated in open space. The presence of many large hunters did not erase danger, but distributed it. No single strategy dominated for long, because every advantage was met by an adaptation in response. Eurasia followed a different rhythm, shaped by repeated interruptions rather than long stability. Ice advanced and retreated, land bridges opened and closed. Entire regions were cleared and recolonized again and again. Each cycle reset the ecological board, removing dominant species and allowing new ones to spread. Predators rarely had uninterrupted time to refine extreme specialization. When conditions changed, those too narrowly adapted faded, replaced by forms better suited to the new climate. Humans emerged within this landscape of resets, evolving alongside animals that had already been filtered by repeated disruption. Danger here often came in waves, intense during certain periods, then diminished as systems rebalanced. The land itself imposed limits on how far any single strategy could go. Australia's story unfolded differently. Once it drifted into isolation, those resets largely stopped. Ice did not scour the continent in the same way. Land bridges did not reopen to deliver new competitors or predators. The evolutionary conversation became internal, shaped primarily by climate, fire, and scarcity rather than by invasion and replacement. This uninterrupted path allowed strategies to deepen rather than cycle out. Adaptations were not tested against newcomers with radically different tools. They were refined against the same pressures repeatedly, generation after generation. Over time, this encouraged specialization over balance. Instead of many predators sharing space and moderating one another, danger concentrated into forms that fit the land perfectly. This concentration explains why Australian danger feels distinct. It is not necessarily greater in number or frequency, but sharper in expression. Without constant external correction, successful strategies had little reason to soften. Ambush replaced pursuit, venom replaced struggle, patience replaced speed. Fire and drought reinforced these tendencies by punishing waste and rewarding certainty. Each environmental filter narrowed the range of viable solutions, funneling evolution toward a small set of highly efficient outcomes. Where Africa balanced danger through diversity and Eurasia diluted it through change, Australia distilled it through continuity. The result is an ecosystem where threat often feels personal rather than dramatic. There are fewer large predators announcing themselves across the horizon, but more subtle risks embedded in everyday movement. This does not mean the land is more hostile by intent. It means its evolutionary history favored forms of danger that persist quietly. The same continent that once supported immense hunters now supports smaller ones that operate with the same precision, scaled down but no less refined. The difference lies in visibility, not potency. Humans sense this intuitively. On continents shaped by balance or reset, danger often follows familiar patterns that can be anticipated. In Australia, anticipation requires knowledge rather than instinct alone. The land asks to be read carefully, not dominated or ignored. This expectation carries forward from an evolutionary history that never paused to accommodate newcomers. The danger feels concentrated because it was allowed to mature without interruption, molded by the same forces for millions of years. Comparing these continents is not about ranking severity, but about understanding process. Africa teaches how coexistence shapes equilibrium. Eurasia shows how disruption reshapes opportunity. Australia reveals what happens when evolution is given time, restraint, and isolation. Its danger became concentrated not because it was harsher, but because nothing arrived to dilute it. The land followed its own path to the end, and the echoes of that journey still linger, quiet but unmistakable, in the way life continues to move across this ancient ground. By this stage in the story, a pattern becomes unmistakable. Australia's living systems were shaped by motion without interruption, by change without the usual counterweights. Evolution here did not pause to compare notes with newcomers, nor was it regularly forced to abandon its progress and begin again. Instead, it moved forward along narrow tracks, guided by scarcity, fire, and isolation, refining whatever worked and allowing it to persist. Innovation unfolded without competition, pressing in from elsewhere. Once a strategy proved effective, it was rarely challenged by an alternative arriving from outside the system. This gave successful traits unusual freedom to deepen, solidify, and remain. On other continents, innovation often meets resistance. New forms appear, flourish briefly, then are tempered or replaced when competitors arrive with different tools. In Australia, that moment rarely came. The continent's long isolation meant that evolutionary experiments were judged almost entirely by local conditions. Heat, drought, and limited resources acted as filters, but they did not introduce novelty. They selected from what was already present. Over time, this created a kind of evolutionary momentum. Traits that solved immediate problems were reinforced repeatedly, generation after generation, without being displaced. Extremes did not burn out quickly. They persisted, becoming stable features rather than temporary spikes. This persistence explains why certain adaptations here feel so pronounced: ambush over pursuit, venom over strength, patience over speed. Each of these strategies offered efficiency, and once established, nothing arrived to undermine them. Without external correction, refinement replaced replacement. Bodies became more specialized. Behaviors grew more exact. The ecosystem did not drift toward moderation because moderation was never required to survive the pressures it faced. Balance, in the sense of evenly distributed roles and constant adjustment between rivals, remained elusive. Instead, the system settled into a tense equilibrium shaped by absence rather than interaction. External correction plays a powerful role in most ecosystems. Ice ages, migrations, and invasions reset dominance and prevent overspecialization. They force lineages to remain flexible or risk extinction. Australia avoided many of these resets. Its climates shifted, but not in ways that erased the entire biological slate. Its seas widened rather than narrowed, preserving separation. Without these interruptions, evolution was allowed to run long arcs, following ideas to their logical ends. This does not mean the land produced more life, only that it produced more concentrated outcomes. The same pressures worked again and again on the same lineages, carving deeper grooves rather than branching paths. As a result, balance never fully arrived in the way it did elsewhere. Instead of many moderate predators sharing space, a smaller number of highly effective ones dominated. Instead of broad safety margins, ecosystems operated close to their limits. This made the system resilient in some ways and fragile in others. Resilient because organisms were finely tuned to endure scarcity. Fragile because disruption could ripple quickly once thresholds were crossed. The absence of balance was not a flaw, it was a consequence of continuity. The land did not need equilibrium to function, it needed efficiency. For humans observing this landscape today, the impression is one of restraint rather than chaos. Nothing appears excessive on the surface, yet beneath that restraint lies a history of extremes that were never diluted. The lack of breaks allowed evolution to commit fully to certain solutions, leaving behind a living system where danger feels distilled. There are fewer dramatic confrontations, but each carries significance. Fewer large actors, but sharper consequences. The land asks for respect not because it is unpredictable, but because it is consistent in its demands. Evolution without breaks does not imply reckless change, it implies sustained direction. Australia followed a narrow evolutionary corridor for millions of years, guided by stable isolation and recurring stress. The outcome was not balance, but coherence, a system where every surviving trait earned its place through long testing rather than frequent challenge. In that coherence lies the reason this continent feels so distinct. It is not unfinished, nor out of balance. It simply arrived at a different answer, one shaped by time, allowed to run its full course without interruption. Living within a land that never softened its edges reshaped the human mind as much as it reshaped behavior. In environments where danger announces itself loudly, fear can become something to challenge or overcome. Here, fear took a quieter role. It became a guide rather than an enemy, shaping respect through awareness instead of panic. Early humans learned that confidence did not protect them, and force rarely solved problems for long. What endured was attention. Fear sharpened the senses, encouraging people to slow their movements, lower their voices, and watch the land closely before acting within it. This was not fear as paralysis, but fear as calibration, an internal adjustment that aligned human presence with a world that rewarded restraint. Over time, this shaped a psychology grounded in humility. The land was not something to be conquered or simplified. It was something to be read, approached carefully, and entered on its own terms. Observation replaced domination because domination failed too often to be trusted. The land responded poorly to blunt force. Efforts to impose order without understanding tended to create new risks rather than reduce them. Instead, survival favored those who noticed patterns that others overlooked. Subtle changes in animal behavior, shifts in wind and light, quiet absences where sound was expected. Knowledge accumulated through watching rather than acting, through patience rather than assertion. This emphasis on observation encouraged a form of intelligence that valued context over speed. Decisions were made slowly, with attention to timing and consequence. The environment did not reward rapid expansion or excess confidence. It rewarded those who chose when not to move as carefully as when to advance. In this way, fear shaped respect, not through dread, but through precision. It narrowed focus, refined judgment, and discouraged unnecessary risk. Caution became a survival trait passed through behavior rather than instinct. Children learned early that safety came from listening remembering, and asking permission of place through ritual and practice. Movement through the landscape followed known paths for good reason, not tradition alone. Camps were placed with attention to visibility, wind, and escape. Fire was used thoughtfully, never casually. Even gathering food carried a sense of negotiation with the land, an understanding that taking too much or acting without care could invite harm later. This cultivated a psychology where restraint felt natural rather than imposed. The mind adjusted to operate within limits, finding security in predictability rather than control. Over generations, this produced a deep cultural comfort with waiting, watching, and adapting, qualities often misunderstood by those from environments shaped by abundance or constant renewal. Cultural memory carried danger forward long after individual experiences faded. Stories preserved more than entertainment. They held maps of risk and safety, reminders of places where the land demanded extra care. Songs encoded routes, seasons, and warnings, allowing knowledge to travel across time without written record. This memory was not static. It evolved as conditions shifted, absorbing new observations and letting others fade. Through this process, fear was never allowed to grow into myth or exaggeration. It remained practical, specific, and grounded. Danger was remembered accurately, neither minimized nor dramatized. This balance prevented complacency without fostering constant anxiety. The land did not need to be feared at all times, only respected in the moments that mattered. In hostile lands, psychology becomes an ecosystem of its own, shaped by the same pressures that mold bodies and behavior. In Australia, that ecosystem favored attentiveness over aggression, patience over speed, and humility over dominance. Fear did not disappear, it found its place. It guided respect and sharpened awareness, helping humans coexist with a world that never promised safety but consistently rewarded understanding. Through careful observation and the preservation of collective memory, people learned to move within danger without becoming consumed by it, carrying forward a way of thinking shaped not by conquest, but by long coexistence with a land that asked to be noticed rather than challenged. By the time one looks closely at how danger functions in this land, an unexpected clarity emerges. What first appears hostile or overwhelming is not disorder at all, but structure. Australia's reputation as deadly does not come from randomness or constant violence. It comes from consistency. Threats follow patterns. Risks repeat themselves in familiar places and times. Once understood, these dangers behave with a reliability that feels almost architectural, as though the land itself has arranged them carefully rather than scattered them wildly. This is why life here endured for so long under such pressure. Chaos rarely allows persistence. Order does. Within this order, threat occupies defined roles. Predators do not roam endlessly or waste energy searching without purpose. They wait where prey must eventually pass. Venomous animals remain close to shelter, heat, and cover, positioned where contact is most likely to occur without pursuit. Marine dangers align with currents, tides, and shallow passageways. Fire follows fuel. Drought follows pattern rather than whim. None of this is arbitrary. Each danger exists where conditions make it efficient. Once these locations and timings are recognized, much of the fear dissolves into understanding. The land does not ambush without logic. It reveals itself to those who learn its rhythms. Predictability is the quiet foundation beneath the continent's most feared traits. Snakes appear where warmth lingers longest. Spiders build where vibration carries clearly. Predators move along established routes shaped by water, vegetation, and memory. Even venom operates predictably, acting in ways refined to conserve energy and end interaction quickly. This does not make danger harmless. It makes it legible. Nature here does not seek to surprise endlessly. It seeks to function smoothly within constraints. Once a strategy proves effective, it is repeated rather than reinvented. Over deep time, this repetition creates stability, not peace, but reliability. This reliability reveals something deeper about evolution's priorities. Nature does not optimize for kindness or cruelty, it optimizes for efficiency. In a land defined by scarcity, waste is the only true enemy. Anything that expends more energy than it returns disappears quickly. Death, in this context, becomes a tool rather than a breakdown. It regulates population, movement, and behavior. It trims excess and reinforces boundaries. Far from being chaotic, death acts like a quiet framework holding the system together. Without it, imbalance would spread, resources would drain, recovery would stall. What feels harsh from a human perspective is simply economy from an ecological one. This is why danger in Australia often feels calm rather than frantic. There is little need for constant aggression. Encounters are brief, outcomes are decisive. The system discourages prolonged struggle because struggle costs energy and invites injury. Instead, life evolved toward precision, one strike instead of many, one moment instead of a chase. One lesson rather than repeated conflict. These traits create an impression of severity, but beneath that severity lies restraint. The land is not violent by temperament, it is deliberate by necessity. Understanding death as structure also explains why the absence of chaos allowed so many dangerous traits to persist. In unstable environments, extremes burn themselves out. Here, stability allowed refinement. Venom grew more precise, ambush grew quieter, patience grew longer. Each improvement reduced noise rather than increasing it. Over time, danger became less visible but more reliable. This reliability allowed species to coexist without constant collapse. The system did not spiral, it settled. For humans living within this framework, survival depended on recognizing that threat followed rules. Once those rules were learned, coexistence became possible. The land did not need to be subdued. It needed to be interpreted. Paths were chosen because they avoided known risks. Seasons guided movement. Fire was applied where it reduced uncertainty. Knowledge aligned human behavior with an already ordered system. Those who ignored this order mistook silence for safety and paid the price. Those who respected it found that the land rarely needed to remind them twice. This is the quiet truth behind the word deadliest. It does not describe frenzy or chaos. It describes a place where life and death are arranged efficiently, where nothing extraneous is allowed to linger, and where the consequences of ignoring structure are immediate. Australia's danger is not loud because it does not need to be. It has been organized for millions of years, shaped into patterns that continue to function long after the giants vanished. Within that order, life persists, not because the land is forgiving, but because it is consistent. Survival in this land has always carried a cost, paid quietly over time rather than all at once. Every living thing that endured here did so by learning how to spend energy carefully, choosing where effort mattered and where restraint offered greater reward. In environments shaped by abundance, excess can be tolerated. Here, excess became a liability. Movement, growth, and aggression all required fuel, and fuel arrived unpredictably. Life learned to measure itself against long stretches of scarcity, adjusting not toward comfort, but toward efficiency. Bodies, behaviors, and even ecosystems were shaped by this constant accounting, where every action needed to justify its cost. Energy trade offs became central to existence. Large bodies required more food and water, making them vulnerable when conditions shifted. Constant activity drained reserves too quickly. Over time, strategies that conserved energy outperformed those built on speed or force alone. Ambush replaced pursuit. Waiting replaced wandering. Venom replaced prolonged struggle. Even plants participated in this economy, growing slowly, hardening their tissues, and investing in defenses that reduced repeated loss. Fire and drought reinforced these decisions by punishing waste and rewarding patience. Survival favored those who could remain still, endure discomfort, and act only when success was likely. This economy of motion and effort shaped a landscape where life appeared calm, even sparse, yet remained tightly tuned to its limits. Risk management followed naturally from these trade offs. When recovery is uncertain, injury becomes more dangerous than hunger. Many species learn to avoid unnecessary confrontation, not through passivity, but through precision. Predators minimized exposure by choosing moments carefully. Prey avoided open confrontation by relying on awareness and timing. Humans, arriving later, entered this same calculus. Risk was not something to be eliminated, only managed. Fire was used to reduce uncertainty, not to control everything. Movement followed known routes because familiarity reduced surprise. Camps were placed with foresight, balancing access to resources with escape and visibility. Survival became an exercise in probability rather than dominance, reducing exposure where possible and accepting risk only when reward justified it. This approach allowed long-term coexistence to emerge. No single species could afford to destabilize the system entirely. Overuse of resources carried consequences that returned quickly. Predators that eliminated too much prey lost their foundation. Herbivores that stripped vegetation too aggressively faced starvation. Humans who ignored the land's limits found themselves vulnerable. Over generations, this fostered behaviors aligned with continuity rather than conquest. Life here did not aim to maximize short-term gain. It aimed to persist. Coexistence did not mean harmony in a gentle sense. It meant tension held in balance through restraint and adaptation. Every participant adjusted, again and again, to the same constraints. For humans, this reality reshaped ambition. Elsewhere, survival often rewarded expansion, control, and transformation of the landscape. Here, those impulses met resistance. The land could not be bent easily, and attempts to do so carried lasting consequences. Instead, people adapted themselves. Knowledge replaced brute strength. Cultural practices evolved to preserve resources rather than exhaust them. Fire was applied in ways that reduced future danger rather than asserting ownership. Tools and movement patterns were refined to minimize strain on bodies and land alike. This was not surrender, it was strategy. By aligning behavior with the land's rhythms, humans found a way to remain without erasing what existed before them. The cost of survival, then, was not simply effort or vigilance, it was limitation, the willingness to accept boundaries and live within them. Australia demanded this of all who remained. Those who could not afford the cost, whether through size, excess, or inflexibility, faded over time. Those who could learned to exist within narrow margins, conserving energy, managing risk, and thinking across generations rather than moments. The land did not offer safety, but it offered consistency. By understanding that consistency and adjusting accordingly, life endured. This is why adaptation mattered more than conquest. Conquest seeks to remove limits, adaptation learns them. In Australia, learning proved the only sustainable path. Survival was never free, but for those who paid its price thoughtfully, the reward was longevity. The land remained unforgiving, yet predictable. And within that predictability, humans and countless other species carved out a long, careful coexistence, shaped not by domination, but by respect for the true cost of staying alive. When the story of this continent is allowed to settle, it leaves behind lessons that extend far beyond its shores. Australia does not stand apart as an exception, but as a clear illustration of how Earth truly works when given time and constraint. The planet does not arrange itself for comfort or safety. It responds to physics, chemistry, and long pressure, allowing life to explore whatever paths remain open. If those paths lead toward extremes, Earth does not intervene, it observes. This continent shows that danger is not a mistake nor a temporary phase awaiting correction. It is a natural outcome of systems refining themselves under consistent stress. Life here pushed toward extremes not because excess was rewarded, but because efficiency demanded it. In landscapes where resources were scarce and unpredictability constant, moderation did not always provide an advantage. The traits that persisted were those that resolved challenges quickly and with minimal waste. Venom replaced struggle. Patience replaced pursuit. Specialization deepened rather than broadened. These are not uniquely Australian tendencies. They are expressions of a general rule. Wherever pressure remains steady and competition does not reset the system, life will follow the narrow paths that work best, even if those paths appear severe from a human perspective. Australia also reveals the illusion of stability. For long stretches, ecosystems can appear balanced, even gentle. Yet beneath that surface lies constant adjustment. Fire clears and regrows. Drought tightens and releases. Species rise, persist, and eventually fade. The continent once supported giants that felt permanent, then quietly lost them. What remained was not a return to safety, but a shift in expression. Stability is a moment, not a promise. It depends on conditions that can change without warning. Earth offers no guarantee that what works today will continue tomorrow. It provides opportunity, not assurance. This lesson extends to humanity as well. Humans are often tempted to believe that intelligence or technology places them outside these patterns. Australia suggests otherwise. Survival here required adaptation rather than control. Knowledge mattered more than force. Observation mattered more than speed. Even then, survival was never assured. It was negotiated daily through behavior aligned with the land's constraints. This mirrors the broader truth of life on Earth. No species is exempt from pressure. Success carries no permanent protection. Evolution does not aim to preserve forms, only functions. When conditions shift, those functions must either adapt or vanish. Australia teaches that Earth does not optimize for safety, but for continuity. Systems persist not because they are gentle, but because they are efficient. When safety emerges, it is often temporary, a byproduct rather than a goal. The planet's history is filled with long, calm periods, interrupted by rapid change, extinctions followed by renewal. This pattern is not cruel. It is simply the result of forces larger than any single lineage. By showing what happens when evolution is allowed to run with few interruptions, Australia highlights tendencies present everywhere, just often hidden by resets and competition elsewhere. In this sense, the continent acts as a magnifying lens. It makes visible processes that operate globally, revealing that life tends toward the edges of what is workable. It explores extremes until they fail or are displaced. Stability lasts only as long as conditions allow. Survival, therefore, is not a birthright, it is an ongoing achievement, renewed each generation. This does not diminish the beauty of life, it deepens it. It frames existence as something dynamic, responsive, and deeply interconnected with the environment that supports it. The quiet lesson that emerges from this long story is one of humility. Earth is not arranged for our convenience or comfort. It is shaped by long histories of pressure and adaptation. Australia reminds us that danger and survival are woven into the same fabric. One cannot exist without the other. Life persists not because it is protected, but because it learns, adjusts, and endures. In that understanding, the story of this land becomes the story of the planet itself, a reminder that survival is always earned, never guaranteed, and always subject to the deep, patient logic of Earth. When all these threads are held together, one truth settles quietly into place. Earth never promised mercy. It does not weigh comfort against hardship, nor does it bend its rules for those who arrive unprepared. The planet responds to forces older than life itself: heat rising, water moving, rock shifting, chemistry unfolding at its own pace. Life exists within these rules, not outside them. Survival is permitted, never guaranteed. Australia makes this reality difficult to ignore, not because it is uniquely cruel, but because it reveals the planet's indifference with unusual clarity. In this sense, Australia serves as a case study written across an entire continent. Here, isolation removed many of the interruptions that soften or mask Earth's underlying logic elsewhere. Evolution was allowed to proceed with fewer pauses, fewer resets, and fewer external corrections. The results were not gentle, they were efficient. The land shaped life according to what worked under long pressure, not what felt safe or fair. Fire returned because conditions allowed it. Drought persisted because climate demanded it. Predators evolved along narrow, effective paths because nothing arrived to displace them. None of this required intention. It unfolded naturally, the way water follows gravity or heat follows energy gradients. Danger within this framework is not a failure of the system, it is a natural outcome. When resources are limited and recovery uncertain, life must make sharp choices. It must favor strategies that end encounters quickly, reduce waste, and conserve energy. Over time, these strategies become embodied as venom, ambush, patience, and restraint. What humans label as deadly is often simply precise. The planet does not remove these outcomes because there is no governing principle that values safety over function. Earth allows what persists to persist until it no longer can. Humanity entered this story very late. By the time people arrived, the land had already completed long chapters of refinement. Ecosystems were mature, tightly tuned, and indifferent to newcomers. Humans did not shape these systems at first, they encountered them. Learning came through observation, adaptation, and loss. This late arrival matters because it challenges the assumption that humanity sits at the center of Earth's story. In Australia, it becomes clear that people are participants, not authors. The land does not reorganize itself around human needs unless humans actively force it to, often at great cost. This realization does not diminish humanity, It places it accurately. Humans are one more species shaped by the same rules that shaped everything else. Intelligence offers tools for adaptation, but it does not grant exemption from ecological limits. When people align themselves with the land's constraints, survival becomes possible. When they ignore those constraints, consequences follow, not as punishment, but as result. Earth does not negotiate, it responds. Australia shows what happens when this indifference is allowed to operate openly. Without promises of mercy, life does not despair. It adapts, it becomes careful, it refines itself. Cultures emerge that value attention, patience, and respect for unseen forces. Ecosystems settle into patterns that prioritize efficiency over abundance. The absence of mercy does not mean the absence of beauty. In fact, much of the continent's stark beauty arises from this exact tension, life existing precisely because it has learned how to endure without expectation of protection. Seen this way, the continent is not a warning, but a reminder. Earth has always operated on these terms. Stability is provisional. Safety is contextual. Survival depends on understanding the environment rather than assuming it will accommodate. Humanity's late arrival means it must learn these lessons quickly or relearn them repeatedly. Australia's long story makes those lessons visible, written into soil, fire scars, and living forms that carry ancient solutions forward. The planet never promised mercy because mercy is not part of its function. What it offers instead is opportunity, the chance to persist by learning how its systems truly work. Australia stands as proof that danger is not an anomaly, but an expression of Earth's deepest processes, and that to live here, or anywhere, is to accept that survival has always been something earned, moment by moment, within a world that owes no explanation for how it moves. After the long arc of danger bent inward and the giants faded from view, a different tone settled over the continent. To modern eyes, much of Australia appears calm, open, and almost generous in its spaces. Skies feel wider, distances stretch quietly. Many landscapes seem still, even forgiving, especially when compared to the intensity written into their deep past. This calm, however, is not the absence of risk. It is the result of time smoothing the sharpest edges without removing the blade beneath. What changed was not the presence of danger, but its volume. Ancient risk once moved loudly across the land, carried by immense bodies and obvious force. Today, that risk whispers. It hides within habits, seasons, and places that look ordinary until they are not. The quiet that followed the danger is real, yet it is layered over older truths that continue to shape how the land behaves. Threats remain present, though they rarely announce themselves. The same strategies that survived the collapse of giants continue to function efficiently. Venom still waits in grass and water. Heat still punishes inattention. Fire still responds quickly to dry winds and accumulated fuel. Drought still tightens its hold without warning, reminding every living thing that abundance is temporary. These forces no longer dominate the landscape through spectacle, but they remain woven into daily life. The difference lies in frequency and scale rather than in nature. Modern danger tends to be localized and precise, affecting individuals rather than reshaping entire ecosystems at once. This makes it easier to overlook, but not less real. The land does not need to roar to be demanding, it only needs to remain consistent. Memory plays a central role in maintaining this balance. Even when danger is not visible, it is recorded into the landscape itself. Fire scars mark old paths of flame. Vegetation patterns reveal where water lingers and where it disappears first. Animal behavior traces invisible boundaries learned over generations. These memories guide movement and decision making for those who know how to read them. In this way, the land carries its own archive, storing lessons learned through long interaction. The absence of towering predators did not erase these records. It allowed them to surface more subtly, embedded in soil, stone, and growth, rather than in confrontation. For humans, this quiet memory shapes experience even without conscious awareness. People sense where caution feels appropriate and where ease settles naturally. Paths feel right or wrong before reasons are articulated. Heat, light, and openness carry emotional weight that traces back to ancient pressures. This is not instinct alone, but accumulated cultural understanding layered over deep environmental patterns. The land teaches continuously, but softly, offering signals that reward attention rather than force. Those who listen find that safety emerges not from domination, but from alignment with what the land remembers. Danger, then, has been reduced rather than erased. The continent no longer hosts the same density of extreme threats acting simultaneously. Many risks that once overlapped have thinned or shifted apart in time. This creates longer stretches of apparent calm, allowing recovery, growth, and relative ease. Yet the underlying logic remains intact. When conditions align, heat still intensifies, fire still runs, water still vanishes, venom still protects and kills efficiently. The quiet does not represent a reversal of history, only a different chapter written with smaller letters. This reduced danger has allowed modern ecosystems to appear more stable, but that stability is conditional. It depends on continued restraint, awareness, and respect for limits. When those limits are ignored, the land responds quickly, revealing how thin the calm can be. Floods replace drought. Fires escape expectation. Fragile systems remind observers that they were never designed for excess pressure. In these moments, the past feels close again, not as myth or warning, but as reminder. The quiet that followed the danger is not empty. It is full of memory, structure, and ongoing negotiation between life and place. Australia did not become safe, it became legible. Its risks learned how to wait instead of pursue, how to hide instead of dominate. This allows modern life to move with a sense of ease unavailable in earlier times, while still carrying the responsibility to notice, remember, and adapt. The ancient story has not ended. It has simply lowered its voice, continuing to shape the land through a calm that holds, within it, the enduring possibility of consequence. The reason this story continues to matter is not because the past was more dramatic than the present, but because the present can feel deceptively calm. Modern safety often masks the deeper systems that still govern the land beneath our feet. Roads, buildings, and technology create a sense of separation, as if danger has been removed rather than merely managed. Yet this perception can blur understanding. Safety today is frequently an overlay, a thin layer resting on top of ancient processes that have not changed their rules. When that layer fails, even briefly, the older logic reasserts itself without hesitation. Australia reminds us that stability is often borrowed, not owned. Ancient lessons become most valuable when they are forgotten. The continent's history shows that danger does not need to be loud to be real, and that calm does not mean permission. Modern humans are accustomed to environments designed around them, landscapes adjusted to reduce risk, delay consequences, and soften extremes. In such settings, it is easy to mistake absence of immediate threat for absence of underlying pressure. Australia's deeper story corrects that assumption. It teaches that safety is situational and conditional, dependent on continued awareness and restraint. When attention fades or confidence outpaces understanding, the land responds in ways that feel sudden only because the warning signs were ignored. These lessons extend beyond one place. Across the planet, humans increasingly encounter environments shaped by long histories they did not create. Deserts expand, fires intensify, weather shifts with growing unpredictability. Australia's past offers a way to read these changes without panic or denial. It shows that hostile systems are not broken systems. They are functioning exactly as their constraints dictate. The challenge lies not in forcing them into compliance, but in learning how to live within their limits. This requires patience, humility, and a willingness to accept that not every landscape can be made gentle without cost. Respecting hostile systems does not mean avoiding them entirely. It means approaching them with understanding rather than assumption. In Australia, survival depended on recognizing where intervention helped and where it harmed. Fire offered protection when used carefully, but destruction when applied carelessly. Movement brought opportunity when timed well, but danger when rushed. The land rewarded those who observed before acting. This approach contrasts sharply with modern impulses toward rapid modification and control. Australia's history suggests that some systems resist improvement because they are already optimized for their conditions. Altering them without understanding their internal balance can amplify risk rather than reduce it. Knowing when not to interfere becomes one of the most difficult skills to develop. Humans are problem solvers by nature, inclined to respond quickly to perceived threats. Yet, many of the continent's greatest dangers arose not from inaction, but from excess response. Removing one pressure often allowed another to grow unchecked. Suppressing fire entirely led to hotter, more destructive burns later. Eliminating large predators reshaped ecosystems in ways that intensified smaller, subtler threats. Each intervention carried consequences that unfolded slowly, sometimes over generations. Australia teaches that restraint can be as powerful as action, and that sometimes the safest response is careful observation rather than immediate change. This story matters because it reframes what preparedness looks like. Preparation is not about eliminating all risk. It is about understanding which risks are unavoidable and learning how to move among them without escalation. Australia's long history demonstrates that danger becomes manageable when its patterns are understood. The land does not demand fear, it demands attention. That principle applies widely to climates under stress, to ecosystems at tipping points, and to societies navigating uncertain futures. By studying places where pressure has long been present, modern humans gain perspective on how to respond without illusion. In the end, Australia is not a warning carved in stone. It is a guide written in patience. It shows what happens when life learns to coexist with constraint rather than fight it. The story still matters because Earth has not changed its terms. It continues to reward awareness over assumption and respect over force. For modern humans, listening to this story is less about looking backward and more about learning how to step carefully forward, understanding that safety is something negotiated continuously with the world, not something it ever promised to provide. When Australia is viewed closely, it begins to feel less like an outlier and more like a mirror. The continent reflects aspects of humanity that are easy to ignore elsewhere, revealing how fragile our place truly is when stripped of buffers and conveniences. Here, the land does not quietly accommodate human presence. It reveals limits. Bodies tire quickly under heat. Water becomes precious rather than assumed. Attention matters more than confidence. In this reflection, Humanity appears not as a dominant force, but as one participant among many, dependent on understanding rather than entitlement. The mirror is not unkind, it is honest. It shows that strength alone has never been enough to guarantee survival. This honesty brings focus to adaptation as humanity's most reliable tool. Across the long story of life on this continent, dominance rarely secured lasting success. Size faded, power overextended itself. Systems built on force alone eventually collapsed under their own demands. What endured were strategies that adjusted to conditions rather than attempting to overwrite them. Humans, when they succeeded here, did so by adapting behavior, movement, and expectations. They learned to travel lightly, to carry knowledge instead of excess, and to allow the land's rhythms to guide their actions. Adaptation proved more durable than control because it reduced conflict with forces too large and too patient to defeat. Humility emerged not as a moral lesson, but as a practical one. The land taught that assuming control carried risk, while listening carried opportunity. Humility did not mean submission or fear. It meant accepting that the environment operated according to rules that could not be negotiated. Fire followed fuel, drought followed climate, venom followed biology. Pretending otherwise did not soften their effects. Adjusting behavior did. Over generations, this humility shaped ways of living that prioritized observation and memory. Knowledge became a form of shelter, and restraint became a form of strength. In this way, survival grew from understanding rather than confrontation. This pattern challenges familiar narratives about human progress. Many histories celebrate expansion, conquest, and transformation of landscapes. Australia offers a quieter counterstory. Here, attempts to dominate the land often intensified danger rather than reducing it. Clearing vegetation altered fire behavior. Ignoring seasonal limits strained resources. Each push for control met consequences that unfolded slowly but firmly. Coexistence proved more effective. Living alongside constraints allowed both people and ecosystems to remain resilient. This coexistence did not remove hardship. It made hardship legible, predictable, and survivable. Seeing Australia as a mirror invites reflection on humanity's broader relationship with Earth. The same fragility revealed here exists everywhere, even if hidden beneath infrastructure and abundance. The planet has always set boundaries. Some environments forgive excess temporarily, others respond immediately. Australia belongs to the latter, making visible what is often delayed elsewhere. It shows that dominance is situational and fleeting, while adaptation remains universally useful. This lesson becomes increasingly relevant as modern humans encounter limits on a global scale. Climate stress, resource strain, and environmental change that echo the pressures long present on this continent. In the mirror Australia holds up, survival does not look like victory. It looks like balance maintained through care. It looks like choosing when not to act as often as when to act. It looks like respecting systems that cannot be simplified without consequence. Coexistence replaces control as the most stable arrangement, not because it is ideal, but because it works. The land does not demand admiration or fear. It responds to behavior. When behavior aligns with constraint, life continues. When it does not, correction follows. Australia reflects humanity not at its strongest, but at its most perceptive. It reveals that intelligence matters only when paired with humility, and that endurance grows from restraint as much as from innovation. This mirror does not accuse, it clarifies. It shows that the path forward has always been less about mastery and more about relationship. Coexistence is not passive, it is active, attentive, and ongoing. In recognizing this, humanity does not shrink. It finds its proper scale within a world that has always been larger, older, and more patient than any single species that walks upon it. As the story draws to its quiet close, Australia no longer stands as something to fear or avoid. It settles instead into the role of a reminder, not a warning sign planted at the edge of the world, but a gentle, persistent signal of how Earth has always worked beneath the surface. This continent does not threaten, it reflects. It shows what happens when life unfolds under steady pressure, without interruption, without promise of comfort. It reminds us that survival was never meant to be effortless, and that endurance is not loud or triumphant, but careful and precise. Australia's history does not accuse humanity, it simply tells the truth, slowly, patiently, and without embellishment. Survival here was never guaranteed, and that is its most important lesson. Every species that persisted did so by negotiating its place moment by moment. Giants vanished despite their power. Smaller forms endured through patience and economy. Even humans, with language and learning, remained vulnerable to the same limits. Survival was earned again and again through attention to season, fire, water, and movement. It was fragile not because life was weak, but because conditions demanded constant alignment. One misjudgment could echo across generations. In that fragility lies a quiet dignity. Life continued, not through dominance, but through adjustment. Seen this way, humanity's presence feels temporary rather than central. People did not arrive as masters of the landscape, but as guests stepping into a long-established conversation. The land did not change its tone to accommodate them. Humans learned instead how to listen, how to move lightly, how to fit into rhythms older than memory. Even now, with modern structures layered across the continent, this truth remains close to the surface. Roads and cities soften daily experience, but beneath them, the same forces persist. Heat still builds, water still disappears, fire still returns. Humanity remains subject to these processes, no matter how advanced its tools become. Australia reminds us that the planet shapes us far more than we shape it. Earth does not respond to intention, only to interaction. When we move in step with its constraints, outcomes become predictable and survivable. When we push against them without understanding, consequences follow. This is not punishment. It is simply feedback from a system that operates according to physical laws rather than moral ones. The continent's long memory shows that Earth is not cruel or kind. It is consistent. It offers opportunity without assurance and persistence without protection. In this closing stillness, Australia's story connects back to the wider planet. What unfolded here is not isolated. It is a clearer expression of processes that act everywhere, often hidden by abundance or disruption. As climates shift and pressures grow more visible across the globe, the lessons written into this land gain new relevance. They suggest that adaptation will matter more than control, humility more than confidence, and understanding more than speed. They suggest that survival will remain a fragile achievement, renewed only through continued attention and restraint. The land does not ask us to admire it or fear it. It asks us to notice it, to recognize that we are participants in systems far older and larger than ourselves. Australia, in all its quiet intensity, does not stand apart from Earth's story. It brings that story into focus. It reminds us that we are temporary guests on a planet that has never promised mercy, only continuity. And in accepting that truth, there is a kind of calm, Not the calm of safety guaranteed, but the calm of understanding where we stand, shaped by the world around us, learning, slowly, how to belong within it rather than above it.